last message in the sermon series that we've been doing on signs of the end times. I hope this has been encouraging to you to see how big God is and that how He sees a big picture. He also sees the big picture of your life. If He sees the big picture of the world, I can guarantee you He sees the big picture of your life too, and how personal that He is. I want to begin with a story. An interesting map is on display in the British Museum in London. It's an old mariner's chart drawn in 1525, outlining the North American coastline and adjacent waters. The cartographer made some intriguing notations on the areas of the map that represent regions not yet explored. He wrote, "Here be giants." He wrote, "Here be fiery scorpions." And "here be dragons." This is actually on a map in the museum. Eventually the map came into the possession of Sir John Franklin, a British explorer in the early 1800s. And scratching out the fearful inscriptions that were written by the person who created it, he wrote these words across the map. "Here is God," is what he wrote. You see, the miner who created that saw the future with fear, but the explorer saw the future with faith. And there was a difference between the two. And you and I, we need to see our future with eyes of faith. We need to see the future of this country through the eyes of faith. And during election season and during the coronavirus, we need to see through eyes of faith in the midst of all. We need eyes of faith for ourselves, for our families, instead of fear. You say, well, why? Why do I need to have eyes of faith instead of eyes of fear? It's because God is for us.
Yes.
He sees the next hour, He sees tomorrow, and He sees the next year and those that proceed after it. He's not confined to space. I've often shared this story that God has a bull's eye or a big view of life, that there was once a kid who wanted to watch the parade, and he found a little hole in the fence, and he was watching the parade go by that little hole. You and I see through a little hole in our humanity. But his brother instead crawled up on the roof and could see the whole parade that was going through and had a different perspective. Or you could say it this way, God's perspective. You and I, sometimes we suffer from this malady called rubberneckers on the road. May you not be any rubberneckers. But you see a bunch of red taillights on the end, and you're trying to figure out what's going on, and eventually you get to where it is, and you see that everybody's looking at a wreck. It's not that they're blocked, they're looking at the wreck. And then once you get past that, then you see people are flying. And there's this helicopter. This helicopter sees before the wreck, at the wreck, and after the wreck. But the person in the line only sees where they're at, whether they're behind it all, at it to look at it and back up traffic, or they're passing. You and I only see where we're at, but God has a bird's eye view in a helicopter that sees the whole thing. Where we're at, where we're going, where we've been, He sees all of it. And so we can trust Him in that and have faith, whatever life is like, because He has a bird's eye view and He sees the whole parade. He sees it all. Isaiah 46, verse 9 through 10. I want to read that to you this morning. Isaiah 46, verse 9 through 10 says this, "Remember the former things, those long ago. I am God, and there is no other. I am God, and there is none like me. I make known the end from the beginning, from ancient times, what is still to come. I say, my purpose will stand, and I will do what I please." In other words, what God purposes to be done, it's going to happen. There's nothing going to stop it. What He purposes, because He is bigger. That's an absolute fact. He's bigger. And the fact that He knows the future about the end times and reveals us should give us confidence in our own future, since He can see the end times too. His purpose for us will stand as much as His purpose for the end times will stand. John 16:13, this is an interesting verse. And I want to say this as a prayer over you as we dive into the last signs today. But when he, the Spirit of truth, comes, he will guide you into all truth, and he will not speak on his own. He will speak only what he hears and will tell you what is yet to come. God wants us to know about the end times. It's said that the Holy Spirit would tell us about things to come, but he also can tell you about things to come for yourself too. He's a God of the big picture. He's a God of detail. He's also a God of the big picture. And so we're going to look at three today, three different signs of the end times that I believe that you will find interesting.
What was that last year?
John 16:13. So here's the first sign that I want to cover with you. The reuniting of the Roman Empire. The reuniting of the Roman Empire. The prophet Daniel, in the verses that we're going to look at, he was shown a flow of world history from about 50 BC to the second coming of Christ, way back in our Old Testament. This incredible prophecy that he received is relevant to us today as much as it was when it was received 2,500 years ago. That's how long ago it would have been given. Daniel and the Jewish people at that time, they were in exile in Babylon because God had to discipline them to get them back on the right track, and that was the way it was going to be done because they had not done it when prophets were sent to them in their own land and people had tried to get their attention. The Jews, with Daniel in Babylon, they were wondering about their own exile, where they were at, what was going to happen, what is their future, what about their nation. They were wondering about the future, and God chose to show them four great world empires through Daniel in answer to the thoughts that they had that would rule over Israel before the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords were to return. And he showed them four great empires. So I want to look at those verses with you. Daniel chapter 2, verse 28 through 45, if you'll follow. It says this: King Nebuchadnezzar had a dream. No one could interpret it. Daniel received the interpretation of that dream, and you see that being given here to him. But there is a God in heaven who reveals mysteries. He has shown King Nebuchadnezzar what will happen in days to come. Your dream and the visions that pass through your mind as you're laying on the bed are these. And by the way, Daniel didn't know what they were. The king didn't come across and say, here's my dream, and I'll tell you what it is. He said whoever's going to have to interpret it, they would have to give it without knowing anything too. And so God showed Daniel the dream that he had given Nebuchadnezzar exactly to every dot over an I and every cross a T. As your majesty was lying there, your mind turned to the things to come, and the revealer of mysteries showed you what is going to happen. As for me, this mystery has been revealed to me not because I have greater wisdom than anyone else alive, but so that your majesty may be known, your majesty may know the interpretation, that you may understand what went through your mind. Your majesty looked, and there before you stood a large statue, an enormous, dazzling statue, amazing in appearance. The head of the statue was made of pure gold, its chest and its arms in silver. So catch the description of it. Its belly and thighs of bronze, the legs of iron, the feet partly of iron and partly of baked clay. While you were watching, a rock was cut out, but not by human hands. It struck the statue on the feet in iron and clay and smashed them. Then the iron and the clay, the bronze, the silver, and the gold were all broken into pieces and became like a shaft on a threshing floor in the summer. The wind swept it away, threshing floor in the summer, without leaving trace. But the rock that stuck the statue became a huge mountain and filled the whole earth. This was a dream, and now we will interpret it to the king. Your Majesty, you are the King of Kings. The God of heaven has given you dominion and power and might and glory. In your hands he has placed all mankind and the beasts of the field and the birds of the sky. Wherever they live, he has made you ruler over them. You are the head of the gold. After you, another kingdom will arise inferior over the whole earth. Finally, there will be a third kingdom, one of bronze, will rule over the whole earth. There will be a fourth kingdom, strong as iron, for iron breaks and smashes everything, and as iron breaks things to pieces, so it will crush and break all others. Just as you saw that the feet and the toes were partly baked clay and partly iron, so this will be a divided kingdom, yet it will have some of the strength of iron in it, even as you saw iron mixed with clay. As the toes were partly iron and partly clay, so this kingdom will be partly strong and partly brittle. And just as you saw the iron mixed in baked clay, so the people will be a mixture and will not remain united any more than iron mixes with clay. And in the time of those kings, the God of heaven will set up a kingdom that will never be destroyed, nor will it be left to another people. It will crush all those kingdoms and bring them to an end, but it will itself endure forever. This is the meaning of the vision of the rock cut out of a mountain, not by human hands, a rock that broke the iron, the bronze, the clay, the silver, and the gold to pieces. The great God has shown the king what will take place in the future. The dream is true and its interpretation is trustworthy. The interesting thing about this dream and the interpretation that Daniel gave, it is something that has been fulfilled, but it is something that is working on still being fulfilled even to our day. It's all-encompassing what he received, because God sees the big picture. Babylon, King Nebuchadnezzar, was pictured as the head of gold, and at that time, currently the Jewish people were held in captivity there. The chest and the arms was the next kingdom to come, the one right after Babylon. It was the Medo-Persian Empire right after it. And the next part of the body, it was followed by the Greek Empire, symbolized the belly, the thighs of grass. Alexander the Great, heard of that name? The last empire was represented by legs of iron with 10 toes. But the Roman Empire was different in this listing of history than the rest, as it appears in two phases. Did you notice 2 legs? And then it gives some description about things. The legs happened when the Roman Empire split into the western part and the eastern part in 393 CE. And so it did split into 2 parts, 2 legs. The first phase of the Roman Empire was from approximately 100 BC to 476 AD, and then the Greek Empire followed it. And the second phase of the Roman Empire, that's something that is working on being fulfilled in our time and day already, and in the future that is to come. And so we can have ideas about that already, the second phase that is taking place. And the 10 toes, they represent that too. Daniel 7:7, if you want to look at it. It appears in another dream. Daniel has a beast with 10 horns. After that, in the night, my vision at night, I looked, and there before me was a 4th beast, terrifying, frightening, and very powerful. It had large iron teeth. It crushed and devoured its victims and trampled underfoot whatever was left. It was different from all the former beasts, and it had 10 horns. This is the same description of the very last part where it talks about the 5 toes on each, 10 toes total. It's a description to go with it. And this prophecy has been, is being fulfilled before our very eyes. There's 2 events that propelled this last part of the prophecy forward in the 20th century. It was World War I and World War II. World War I and World War II, Europe had fought tooth and nail with one another. The countries just tearing each other up all the time and always fighting. You saw that's what the world wars were about too. But because of those 2 wars, things were propelled forward. It began to change. There was this reuniting of the Roman Empire that began to take place. You think of the Roman Empire, it's quite a vast area there in Europe. The Treaty of Rome was signed in 1957 and led to the European Union. And so you begin to see a foreshadowing of a Roman Empire coming back together that had not been together or united in any way. Even to this day, for 1957, they have a common political leadership, they have a common economy, they have a common currency, and a common military that they share with one another. And currently the European Union has united the old Roman Empire and has 27 countries that are part of it. And so you saw a prophecy from way back in. It's a sign to letting us know about the end times that we have a reuniting of those countries. Is it the final 10 toes? No, it is not. We'll talk about that. But it is a foreshadowing to let you know in watching things that God foresaw this was coming back together, all these countries that were separate, and was going to become an empire again. Daniel chapter 8 verse 7 says this: "While I was thinking about the horns, there before me was another horn, a little one, which came up among them, and 3 of the first horns were uprooted before it. This horn had eyes like the eyes of a human being, and a mouth that spoke boastfully." With the European Union coming back together, the stage is being set for the end times, because the European Union will eventually, in the future, become 10 toes or 10 horns that's listed there. And the one that comes out of all that, that's the Antichrist. The Antichrist will arise out of the European Union, the old Roman Empire, according to the Bible. Once again, just for interesting sake, many people try and figure out who the Antichrist is and everything. You will not know who he is. You will not be here. There's no point in trying to figure it all out. Do I believe every generation has an Antichrist because Satan does not know when Jesus is coming back? Yes, he prepares somebody, but we do not know who that person is, and it's vain in a way to look for, and just it can confuse things. But the Antichrist will arise from this united Roman Empire. The inventor of the cathode tube was Lee De Forest. It was made in 1926. He had a curious perspective. The tube is what made the television possible that you and I have today. But can I tell you something that he said? He said it was an impossibility and no one should waste their time on dreaming about making a TV. And he invented the thing that created the TV for you and I. And over the years, it might have seemed impossible to have the United Roman Empire, all the nations of the region, as they fought with one another for centuries, come together. But God saw it in the future that it was going to happen, and God is trustworthy. And so you have a coming together of the old Roman Empire once again. Here's the next thing to look at for signs of the times when we look for Jesus coming back. The Middle East peace process. The Middle East peace process. I know these are heavier topics today, but these are Bible-listed things for us to note. The Middle East peace process. Think about it with me for a moment. What's the number one problem in the world for decades? Your lifetime. It's the ongoing hostilities in the Middle East that never seem to cease. On and on and on and on. During his 1960 presidential campaign, John F. Kennedy often closed his speeches with the story of Colonel Davenport, the Speaker of the Connecticut House of Representatives. One day in 1789, the sky of Hartford darkened ominously, and some of the representatives, glancing out the windows, feared the end was at hand. Quelling a clamor for immediate adjournment, Davenport rose and said, "The day of judgment is either approaching or it is not. If it is not, there is no cause for adjournment. If it is, I choose to be found doing my duty. Therefore I wish that candles be brought. Rather than fearing what is to come, we are to be faithful till Christ returns. Instead of fearing the dark, we're to be lights as we watch and wait." You and I, the same thing, as though we consider the signs of the end times. We're not to be afraid because there's things that indicate that we can be in the end times. We're to have faith because we're to be about God's business in the end times. We're to be accomplishing His will and His purposes. You say, why does the Middle East monopolize the world's attention? The Middle East peace process is an important sign of the end times. It sets the stage for the final covenant of peace between the Antichrist and Israel that will happen in the Bible. Give you some ideas about the wars and things. We're talking about Israel itself that is faced. The official day of Israel becoming a nation was in May 14th, 1948. All the Arab countries around her immediately declared war on her, and it still is continuing. Remember, we talked a few weeks ago about how that was a prophecy that a nation would come back together that wasn't a nation anymore, and God did it, and that was a sign. 1948, 1949, Israel was attacked by Egypt, Jordan, Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, and Saudi Arabia. They were predicted to not make it through it. God intervened and used a little ragtag army to fend off all of those nations when it should have never happened. 1956, Israel had to fight with Egypt over the Suez Canal. 1964, the PLO was formed with the purpose of destroying Israel and creating a Palestine state instead. Terrorism was the way to attack Israel. 1967, Israel was attacked by Egypt, Jordan, and Syria. 1973, Israel was attacked by Egypt on the Day of the Atonement. 1982, Israel was attacked by Lebanon over and over by acts of terrorism. 1987, Israel was attacked by the Palestinians with acts of terrorism. 2000, Israel was attacked by Palestinians with acts of terrorism. It continues to face acts of terrorism through aggression of Iran to this day. And think about all the major countries that have tried to do something. The United States, Russia, the United Nations, the European countries have all tried to create a lasting peace in the Middle East, and none of it has stuck. It has not created a lasting peace in the Middle East. The Bible says, though, at a time will come when false peace will come, and it will be established by the Antichrist in the Middle East. People will applaud the peace that he brings, even though it's false. This is Daniel 9:27. He will confirm a covenant with many for 1 7. In the middle of the 7, he will put an end to the sacrifice and the offering. And in the temple, he will set up an abomination that causes desolation until the end that is decreed to be poured out on him. So this week we're talking about is a 7-year time period of the book of Revelation, the tribulation. It says that the Antichrist will sign a peace treaty with Israel and will bring peace to them, but he will break that peace 3.5 years into it. We also know that the temple will be rebuilt in that time because they will begin to worship there. In the middle of that 7-year period, he will set himself up as God and say he's God. The Antichrist will. 1 Thessalonians 5:3. While people are saying peace and safety, destruction will come on them suddenly as labor pains on a pregnant woman, and they will not escape. Revelation 6:3-4. When the Lamb opened the second seal, I heard the second living creature say, "Come." And then another horse came out, a fiery red one. Its rider was given power to take peace from the earth, to make people kill each other. To him was given a large sword. The Antichrist will come as a man of peace on a white horse first, bow with no arrows, to establish his kingdom, and then he will use force to establish it for those that will not follow, to enforce his dominion over the whole world. All the attempts for Middle East peace and inability to achieve it should be a reminder of us for the end times. I'm not saying that it isn't worthy to try and find peace in the Middle East and help people get along, but I am saying the Bible teaches that the peace where in the Middle East everybody gets along and there's never a problem again, it's not going to happen. It's not going to happen. And when you see someone enforce it and Israel does get peace, you won't see it actually. You'll be gone. Where they do and the Arab countries stop attacking them and they can rebuild their temple, that will be the Antichrist that brings that about. And then he will break it. And nations will gather against them, battle of Armageddon, and then Jesus will set up a peace that never ends for Israel and for us. Here's the last one that I want you to consider today, and even in our generations you've seen this, and it's a sign of the end times. The rise of Babylon. The rise of Babylon. Go ahead and equate this if it helps you out. Iraq and Babylon are the same thing. It was called Iraq later on, and it's the same region. Does the rise of Iraq and world prominence have significance on the end times? Yeah. According to the Bible, that it does. To understand the answer to this question, we have to... There you go. That's number 2 that you missed, all right? I got to preach and forgot to move it along. Here's number 3. We have to look at its past and future. Babylon was the term used for Iraq in the Bible. It's the second most mentioned city in the Word of God. The first one is Jerusalem. We talked about that's the city of God. The second most mentioned city in the Bible is Babylon. It's mentioned 290 times. And the parallel that's drew when you look at the two cities is Babylon is man's city and Jerusalem is God's city in the Bible. Babylon is a place of rebellion and pride. It was the first city built after the flood, and the famous Tower of Babel was constructed there. It's like a tale of two cities, God's and man's cities. The story ends with man's city destroyed, and God's city remains in our Bible and looking at it. Isaiah 13:10-13 says this: "The stars of the heaven and their constellations will not show their light. The rising sun will be darkened, and the moon will give its light. I will punish the world for its evil and the wicked of their sins. I will put an end to the arrogance of the haughty and will humble the pride of the ruthless. I will make a people scarcer than pure gold, more than rare than the gold of Ophir. Therefore I will make the heavens tremble, and the earth will shake from its place, and the wrath Almighty in the day of his burning anger." At the end of the tribulation period and the coming of Christ, the city of Babylon will be wiped off the face of the earth. It's a city that will not exist anymore. The Bible says that Babylon will be rebuilt in the end times, though. Do you know some interesting facts? Even though Saddam Hussein was removed, did you know that he was preparing things like preparing himself to Nimrod, and also bringing all the people and all that type of stuff, just like in the Tower of Babel, and all he was delving into all of that, and so you see some foreshadowing inside of there. Here's about the rebuilding of Iraq. Then the angel, this is out of the book of Isaiah 2. Then the angel who was speaking to him, it's actually Zechariah 5:5-1. Then the angel who was speaking to him came forward and said to him, "Look up and see what is happening." I asked, "What is it?" He replied, "It's a basket." And he added, "This is the iniquity of the people through the land." Then the cover of lead was raised, and there in the basket sat a woman. He said, "This is wickedness," and pushed her back in the basket to push its lead cover down. Then I looked up, and there before me were two women with their wind in their wings, and they had wings like those of a stork, and they lifted up the basket between heaven and earth. Where are they talking about the basket? I asked the angel who was speaking to me. He replied, "To the country of Babylon, to build a house for it. When the house is ready, the basket will be set there in its place." And so it talks about a rebuilding of Babylon in the end times. And the Antichrist in Babylon the Antichrist will rebuild Babylon, but it also is already going to be rebuilt towards him coming. And they will be closely allied, and it's probably an economic and commercial capital that Antichrist will have. Think about it, why it's a logical thing. We're talking about someone who controls the oil of the Middle East has control of the world. Even with the Antichrist is setting up in that area. But Revelation 17-18 prophesies the final destruction of Babylon at the coming of Christ. After this, I saw another angel coming down from heaven. He had great authority, and the earth was illuminated by his splendor. With a mighty voice he shouted, "Fallen, fallen is Babylon the Great. She's become a dwelling place for demons and a haunt for every impure spirit, a haunt for every unclean bird, a haunt for every unclean and detestable animal. For all the nations have drunk the maddening wine of her adulteries. The kings of the earth committed adultery with her, and the merchants of the earth grew rich from her excessive luxuries." And so, as we watch for the return of Christ and just look, realizing end times, you keep your eyes on Iraq, because it's an area that God said that would be rebuilt, things would happen there, and you do see those possibilities in the country stabilizing and its oil reserves being sold and everything, and even us playing a part in that and getting rid of dictators and all those things. So keep your eyes on Iraq. It will be at the center of attention at the end times. So as we conclude this morning, one night at a dinner, a man who had spent many summers in Maine fascinated his companions by telling of his experiences in a little town named Flagstaff. The town was to be flooded as part of a large lake for which a dam was being built. In the months before it was flooded, all improvements, repairs in the whole town were stopped. What was the use of painting a house if it was to be covered with water in 6 months? Why repair anything when the whole village was to be wiped out? So, week by week, the whole town became more and more bedraggled, more gone to seed, more we be gone. And then he added, by way of an explanation, where there is no faith in the future, there's no power in the present. You say, what does that mean to you and I? You and I, as Christians, are not to be we be gones. We know God holds the future. We can trust his awesome power. And though this application of trying to apply these signs to your life, I know that they cannot be. We can't apply seeing a God of the big picture. What do you need to trust him with today? Because the God of the big picture is worthy to be trusted with it. And so I'm going to ask if the worship team would come back up. You can be seated or stand, whatever you want to worship. And I want to encourage you today that as we worship, talk to God. What do you need to trust Him with? But also I know that somebody, since we're doing YouTube still, and there are people who follow aren't part of our church, and we're doing it live on Facebook for people now, that there might be somebody that doesn't know the Lord. And so I do want to pause for a second and give an opportunity if somebody needs to accept the Lord today. Jesus, you're the Son of God. You died for me and you're resurrected. I invite you into my life. I ask for forgiveness of my sins. I'm sorry. I've done it my way. And now I want to do it your way. So come in. I welcome you. And I thank you as I welcome you. You wash my sins white as snow. You throw them in the bottom of the sea of forgetfulness and don't remember them anymore. And you also remove my sins from me as far as east is from the west. And so I ask for that in your name. Come into my life. I give it all to you. Now help me serve you and help me get connected